So, to show you how Redux works, I attached a project to this lecture. It's a very simple project with a container, the counter container, and two components. In the end, what it does is it gives us this page where we have a counter at the top, which we can manipulate with these buttons. And these buttons just use the normal state as React gives it to us as we used it before with the state property and our methods. So this is normal React state. Nothing Reduxish about it. Redux wasn't even installed. That is the next thing I want to do though. I'll quit npm start and I'll run npm install -- save redux. Just Redux. Now I said the Redux library works standalone and we'll actually use it standalone for now, but we'll soon add it to our React application to see how it works together with it. So with Redux installed, I'll create a new file in the root folder next to the package.json file. I'll name it reduxbasics.js. Now this file here will not be holding any React code. We won't include it into our React project. I'll execute it with Node.js instead, just to show the different concepts of Redux in one file and to show that it's independent of React. So in this Redux basics file, I want to create everything that we need to use Redux. That of course is the store. That will be my reducer. That will then be an action probably, or some code dispatching an action. And we also certainly want to see a subscription in action. So let's start with the store. And for that, I need to import something from Redux. Now, we'll still use the import something from something syntax later when we go back to React. But since I plan on executing this file with Node, I need to use the Node import syntax, which is I'll create a constant, name it Redux maybe, and this constant will now require Redux, like this. Again, this require syntax is Node.js syntax and only required because I want to show this with Node.js only first. We'll soon go back to React, no worries. So here I can then create a constant named createStore, which refers to Redux createStore. CreateStore is a function, but don't execute it yet. CreateStore, as the name suggests, allows us to create a new Redux store. I'll store it in a constant named stored, but you can of course give this constant any name you want. And here I'll simply execute createStore like this. CreateStore like this won't do much though. A store needs to be initialized with a reducer, because the reducer, and remember we only have one reducer, even if we combine multiple ones they will be merged into one. The reducer is strongly connected to the store. It's the only thing that may update the state in the end. That's why we need to pass the reducer to this creation function here, because it's so closely connected to the state. Therefore, I actually need to create my reducer first before I create the store. So here I'll create my root reducer. The name of course is also up to you. And that is just a function. You can of course create that with the function keyword now. You can also use an arrow function, whatever you like. Now, this function here receives two arguments. The first one is the current state, because as I said, the reducer gets two arguments, state and the action. And the state is the old state, which it then may update. So the state is the first argument, the second argument is the action. And then the function has to return one thing, and that is the updated state. The simplest reducer you can write simply returns the old state. So this is a valid reducer, though of course it does nothing. It just returns the state we already had. But we can already use that reducer and pass it as an argument to createStore, root reducer. With that, our reducer, our store is created with that reducer in mind, and now we have a created store. However, this store will hold an undefined state. We can verify this by console logging store and there get state. That's a function we should execute and it will pull out the state from the store. Well, let's have a look at that. Now we need to execute that file with Node.js, and we do this by typing node in the command line and then the file name. You need to navigate into the folder of that file first in the terminal though. So in my case, node redux-basics.js. This will execute the file and spit out any console log outputs right in the terminal. So here you see undefined, and that exactly is coming from this console log statement. The state is undefined because our root reducer only returns the old state and we never initialize it. To initialize the state, I'll set up a new constant which I'll name initial state. As for all constants, this name is up to you. It's a JavaScript object, though theoretically it could also just be a number or anything like that. So it doesn't have to be an object, but most often it is because you have more than one field in your global state most of the time. But if your global state is just a number, you could just set up just a number. Here I'll set up a JavaScript object though. And this JavaScript object should, for example, hold my counter. Can be null, 0, initially. Now in the root reducer, I'll use a feature provided by ES6. I can initialize this argument to the function with a default value. Whenever this function is now called with this argument being undefined, it will take the default value instead. A default value is simply assigned by adding an equal sign and then the value you want to use as a default. So now it will take initial state whenever state is undefined, which will be the case when it's creating the store where it will execute the reducer for the first time. For all subsequent actions, the reducer will have been executed one time, so the current state then will be your initial state and you can start changing that. With that in place, let's save this file and let's rerun node redux-basics.js. If we do this, we now see our new state down there with counter 0. This is the updated state, or the initial state I should say. So this is how we create a store with a reducer and how we initialize the state. How do we now subscribe to the state and dispatch actions? Let's take a closer look in the next lectures.